Hey guys, tonight we slip off our sneakers, hush our modern worries, and tumble back through the centuries to the misty valleys of 15th century Korea. You're not a noble, not a warrior, and definitely not someone who gets to sleep in. You're a paper maker. And your day? It begins before the sun even considers stretching. Your eyes crack open in the gray hush just before dawn. The air in your room is chilly because central heating hasn't been invented, and your paper-thin blanket is, ironically, also made of paper. Outside, the thatched roof of your hammock creaks as a breeze slinks through the tiled eaves. You listen. Roosters. More than one. Somewhere off to the left, a neighbor's dog begins its usual tirade against a bird it will never catch. You groan. Not dramatically, you don't have the energy for that. Just one of those small, reluctant, I still remember my dreams groans. You roll off your mat, the rush-covered floor hard beneath your bare feet, and drag on your stiffest cotton overjacket. It's stained with fiber bits, and yes, that is a smear of steamed mulberry sap from 3 days ago. Good morning. Now you probably won't survive this. Not because of disease or famine, though to be fair, those are totally on the table, but because of back pain. There's something about hauling water, bark, and woven mats all day that tends to destroy spines before people hit 40. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead, post your city and local time in the comments. I always love seeing how far and wide we travel together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step outside, squinting as the horizon starts to smear with pale orange. Mist clings to the footpaths like a gossip who hasn't yet had her rice wine. Your family's small courtyard smells faintly of wood smoke and fermented bean paste. Somewhere, someone is already grinding millet. The rhythm of pestle on stone echoes gently between rooftops. You walk to the well, cradling a clay jug that has a chip in it, the same chip that sliced your thumb more times than you'd like to admit. You wince as icy water sloshes up your arm. No gloves. You've never even heard of gloves. You're 15 or 16. Ages blur when your calendar is made of lunar scribbles and oral tradition. After a few sips of plain water and one unenthusiastic bite of dried rice cakes from last night's dinner, you head back inside. There's no mirror in your house, but if there were, you'd see your face is smudged. Your hands are already stained with yesterday's ink, and there's a piece of bark in your hair. Standard. You grab your tools, a straw shoulder basket, a dull knife, and a rope sling. As you sling the basket across your back, your younger sibling stirs inside, muttering nonsense in their sleep. Lucky them. You step into your straw shoes, still damp from yesterday, and begin the short walk down to the riverbank. Along the way, other early risers nod in your direction. A few other paper apprentices join the trail, yawning and scratching their heads. Nobody talks. Talking before sunrise is for monks and criminals. The air gets wetter as you descend. Frogs chirp nearby, undeterred by your clumsy footfalls. Your shoes squish as you cross the marshy edge of the Han River tributary, which, in the 15th century, is still relatively clean, though you wouldn't exactly drink from it without boiling. This is your first task of the day, harvesting dock, the paper mulberry. The thin trees cling to the muddy shore like they know what's coming. You spot a good cluster and get to work. With a few practiced motions, you bend the branches downward, knife sawing through the pliable wood. The younger shoots are best. They yield the smoothest fibers. Older branches, they're stringy, rough, and tend to gum up the vats later. You load your basket slowly, working in silence except for the occasional sniffle and the soft rustle of fiber against fiber. You're not alone out here. A heron wades nearby, judging you with absolute disdain. There's also a turtle, half submerged in the muck, who doesn't move even when you accidentally splash water on him. Honestly, he might be dead. You consider poking him. You don't. Historical side note, dak wasn't just used in Korea for paper, it was also occasionally boiled down for medicinal salves, though the efficacy of those is, let's say, still up for debate. Historians still argue whether papermaking in this era was fully secular or had ritualistic origins, especially in royal workshops. Some even claim paper was offered in shamanistic ceremonies, but the evidence is patchy at best. Back in the real, muddy world, your basket is finally full, the weight pulling your shoulders into a resigned slump. You wrangle the rope across your chest to keep it from bouncing and begin the climb back toward the village. By now, the sky is pale blue. You pass a merchant's ox cart and nod to the driver. He doesn't nod back. Typical. You step aside for two noble children skipping past, their robes bright and clean and extremely unhelpful. One of them points at your shoes and whispers something to his brother. Probably something like, "Why does that peasant smell like swamp salad?" Classic. You arrive back home with a soaked hem and an aching neck. The courtyard now smells of steaming rice and early sweat. Your mother barely looks up from sorting dried herbs as you unload your basket. Your father is already hauling water to the boiling vat. You glance up at the sky again, fully morning now. The rooster crows, smug as ever, from atop the neighbor's wall. You barely get a moment to rest before you're off again, this time to the backyard work shed. You still smell like riverbank, but that's expected. You're basically 30% mud at this point. A few other apprentices are already there, including that one guy who always pretends his back hurts whenever there's actual labor to do. He gives you a tired smile that somehow still says, "Guess who's doing the heavy lifting again?" Your main task now, stripping bark. But before that, you need to cut the branches down to manageable lengths. You kneel on a flat board, pull out your knife, and start slicing. The blades aren't very sharp, but after months of this routine, your arms know the motions like muscle memory. It's not graceful, but it gets the job done. Chop, rotate, slice. Next branch. Once they're trimmed, the branches go into a wooden soaking trough beside the main shed. Cold water splashes your already freezing hands as you submerge each bundle. The bark needs to soften before you can peel it, so you sit back for a moment and stretch. Above you, a crow lets out a particularly rude squawk and flaps away like it has an urgent appointment. Now comes the fun part, peeling bark. You squat by the trough, tug a branch free, and use your knife to lift the outer layer of bark. Sometimes it comes off in a long, satisfying curl. Other times it shreds into stubborn flakes that cling like your younger sibling during thunder. The white inner bark, called bakpi, is what you're after. It's the gold standard for hanji paper. Soft, strong, and annoyingly clingy when it gets wet. Each strip is added to a growing pile beside you, and the wet fibers already stick to your sleeves. You lose count after 30 branches. Probably for the best. As you peel, the chickens from next door wander into your yard like they own it. One particularly aggressive rooster, let's call him General Peckington, marches up to your basket and gives it a peck. You glare at him. He glares back. There's a moment of tense eye contact before he struts away with the air of someone who just won a silent argument. You sigh. Your lower back is already sending early warning signals, and the sun is barely above the roofline. Welcome to the glamorous life of a 15th century paper maker. Meanwhile, your father tends the outdoor cauldron, a huge iron pot resting on a clay hearth filled with boiling water. You'll use this later to steam the peeled bark, but right now it's just belching out clouds of steam that make your eyes sting and your nose run. You glance over and see he's using the good ladle, the one you're definitely not allowed to touch. He catches your look and grunts in a way that probably means, "Don't even think about it." Now, a quirky little historical tidbit here. Some families used to tie dyed threads around their best mulberry stalks during harvest to remember which ones were planted under auspicious signs. Superstitious? Sure. But when your entire profession depends on soggy tree bark, you take your luck where you can get it. Back in the present, you shift positions. Your legs have gone numb from kneeling, so you switch to a crouch, which somehow manages to be worse. You try not to think about the hours ahead. You try not to think about how long it'll take to scrape the steamed bark later. You definitely try not to think about the fact that your friend Bowery is already inside bragging about how she peeled 50 branches in half the time. She didn't, but she will say it loudly and repeatedly until someone makes her stop. Historically, the scale of paper production in 15th century Korea is a matter of debate. Some scholars believe many households made paper just for personal use or local trade, while others argue there were quasi-industrial family operations supplying government bureaucracies. You suspect your family falls somewhere between not quite a major operation, but definitely not just making birthday cards for grandma. Eventually, your pile of stripped bark is high enough to call it a morning's work. You bundle the strips with twine and lug them toward the cauldron, where the water is now bubbling like a pot of particularly angry soup. The cauldron smells faintly of ash and old bark. You slide the bundle in and watch it sink, the strips slowly unfurling like soggy noodles. Your job now? Wait. Which means standing around pretending not to freeze. Your mother appears with a bowl of hot barley tea. You take it with both hands, bowing your head out of habit. She doesn't say anything, just points at your sleeves, which are covered in sticky bark sap and one feather. Thanks, General Peckington. You shrug. She shakes her head. The tea is bitter but warm. You sip it slowly while steam curls around your face. There's a rhythm to this work. Soak, steam, strip, scrape, pound, soak again. It's repetitive. It's exhausting. And yet, there's something almost meditative about it, once you stop feeling your feet. A few kids run past the gate, laughing and throwing clumps of snow mud. One of them shouts something about smelling like boiled trees, and you wonder if that's aimed at you. Probably. Eventually, the bark is ready to come out of the cauldron. You use long bamboo tongs to lift it, steam rolling off the fibers like breath on a cold morning. The strips are pliable now, soft enough for the next stage, but you'll get there soon enough. For now, you carry the hot, dripping bundle to the flat work table, fingers tingling from the heat and the sheer weight of it all. You glance up at the sky, still morning, still cold. But the hardest part of the day hasn't even started. You look down at your hands, red, raw, sticky, and you smile just a little, because tomorrow you'll do it all again. Our fingers are already tender, but there's no time for pity. The bark is still warm from steaming, and that means it's perfect for the next task, scraping. Not glamorous, not fun, and definitely not gentle on the hands. You sit cross-legged at the low scraping bench, a wide plank balanced on stones and already stained from years of use. In front of you is your freshly steamed bundle of bakpi, the inner bark that's the soul of your paper. You grab your scraper, a flat-edged tool worn smooth from constant work, and settle in for the long haul. Scraping isn't just about peeling off the darker outer layer. It's about finesse. You need to remove knots, blemishes, and lingering bits of the kiapi, or outer bark, without mangling the fiber beneath. Too rough, and you'll shred the bark. Too gentle, and you'll leave behind impurities that'll ruin the sheet's texture. This is the Goldilocks zone of medieval bark surgery. You drag the scraper along a strip of bark, and it curls off in a satisfying ribbon. Not bad. The next piece? A disaster. The edge crumbles, revealing a wormhole. You grimace. Worm-eaten bark is the papermaker's curse. You discreetly toss that one behind the bench. No one saw. Hopefully. As you work, the village courtyard begins to hum with late morning life. A boy runs past, chasing a chicken with a feather tied to its tail. Your neighbor's laundry creaks on the line, the fabric stiff as bark in the cold breeze. And from across the alley, someone bangs a gong to call workers to the kiln. It's shaping up to be one of those days where everyone seems very busy, but no one is actually doing anything. You're not alone at the scraping bench. Beside you, Bo-Ri, yes, that Bo-Ri, is dramatically cracking her knuckles and telling an extremely suspicious story about how she once scraped an entire batch of bark with a broken spoon and divine patience. You don't even bother reacting. You've heard this one. Twice. She glances at your pile. "You're falling behind," she says with faux sympathy. You gesture with your scraper. "One more word and this goes flying." Bo-Ri laughs and gets back to work. The actual sound of scraping is a rhythm. Squeak, squeak, thunk. It's hypnotic after a while, like a papermaker's lullaby. But your fingers pay the price. Raw, sticky, constantly moving. At one point, a strip sticks to your sleeve and flaps like a soggy flag as you reach for another piece. By midday, your lap is covered in fiber shavings. You're tired, and you smell vaguely like steamed salad. But your bundle of scraped back pea is finally ready. You pile the clean strips into a bamboo basket, trying not to crush them. It's easy to forget just how valuable this stuff is. Good hanji, traditional Korean paper, is prized across the peninsula. It's strong, flexible, and famously long-lasting. Some documents written on 15th century hanji still survive today. That's more than we can say for most modern printer paper, which curls up and dies if you breathe on it wrong. Historians still argue whether the early Korean methods were adapted from Chinese techniques or whether they developed independently. There's even some debate about whether the bark was ever fermented for days before scraping to improve flexibility. No one agrees, and no one really wants to. It would mean admitting that their grandmother's method wasn't the only correct one. You carry the cleaned bark to the next workstation, your arms aching from the load. On the way, you pass the village well again, where two women are rinsing vegetables and discussing, loudly, how the magistrate's new concubine is definitely from a disgraced family. Scandal. You try not to smirk, but eavesdropping is half the fun of communal labor. At the courtyard center, you dump your clean bark strips into a wooden tub. Time to beat them into pulp. But before that, a quick detour for a drink. You dip a gourd into the communal basin and sip the cool, metallic water. It's not glamorous, but it does the job. You rub your sore shoulders and glance up at the sun, which is now stubbornly glaring down like it wants a progress report. Here's a lesser-known fact. Some papermakers believed singing to the bark as it soaked made the fibers softer. You don't sing. Not in public, not with Bo-Ri nearby, who once laughed for a full minute when you hummed near the steaming pot. Still, you wonder if the bark can tell the difference between a song and a sigh. Your moment of peace is interrupted by a small disaster. A chicken, possibly General Peckington, possibly his equally malevolent cousin, has managed to sneak into the workshed and is currently standing on top of your basket. You lunge, arms flailing, and the bird shrieks, flapping away in a flurry of feathers and misplaced pride. It leaves behind one gift, a single dropping on the edge of your bark pile. Fantastic. You scrape it off with the corner of your sleeve, the stained one, there's always a stained one, and carry on. The rest of the morning slips by in a haze of motion. You scrape, peel, and sort. At some point, Bo-Ri starts humming a folk song under her breath, and despite yourself, you hum along for a verse or two. The repetition dulls your aches, or at least distracts you from them. Eventually, your father emerges from the back with a short nod. "Time to beat," he says, and just like that, your brief window of relative calm is over. You crack your knuckles, not to impress Bo-Ri this time, but because your hands are too stiff to close. You're about to meet the mallet. Here's the thing. This part requires patience. The vat has to rest so the dak pool can interact with the pulp. It's a subtle chemistry, one you can't rush. You sit on the edge of the workbench and stretch your legs, which are numb from kneeling. Bowery lies flat on her back in the grass, arms spread like she's about to ascend into the sky. "I'm dying," she says, not moving. You say that every time. This time I mean it. You toss a twig at her face. It bounces off her forehead. She doesn't react. And then your little brother appears out of nowhere, holding a fish. A live fish. "Can I put it in the vat?" he asks. "No." He stares at the fish. The fish stares back. You gesture toward the well. Release him into the wild. Like a hero? Sure. He dashes off, and you briefly consider whether you'd be held responsible if the fish ends up in someone's stew tonight. With the pulp resting and your arms slightly less jelly-like, your father calls you both over to check the consistency. He dips a screen frame into the vat. This is the balu, a bamboo frame used to scoop the pulp and form sheets. He lifts it out, watching how the fibers settle, testing the blend. Then he nods. "It's ready," he says. You swallow hard. This is where the real artistry begins, scooping pulp, draining water, forming a perfect sheet. It's not just technical, it's a dance. One slip, and the sheet sags or tears. You get one shot per scoop. The pressure? No big deal. Just your entire afternoon resting on surface tension and hand stability. You and Bowery look at each other. "Ready to mess this up?" she whispers. "Born ready," you whisper back. You roll up your sleeves, what's left of them, and step up to the vat. The thickened pulp water gleaming like liquid moonstone under the early afternoon sun. Everything's quiet now. Even Bowery, usually a walking sound effect, has gone serious. This is the sacred moment. Your father hands you the balu, the bamboo screen frame. It's rectangular, woven tight like a fishing net, and attached to a wooden mold that keeps the shape even. It's light in your hands, but heavy with responsibility. You hover the frame just above the pulp and then dip it in, arms steady. You drag it through the water with a practiced motion, forward, then slightly backward, then a gentle side-to-side swish. The fibers swirl, caught in the frame's lattice, and then, as you lift, the excess water drains through, leaving behind a thin, even sheet of future hanji. It's beautiful, milky, almost translucent. Perfect. And then Bowery sneezes, loudly. Your frame jerks. The corner sloshes. One side of the sheet sags like a tired hammock. You sigh, tilt the frame, and watch the imperfect pulp sheet slide off and dissolve back into the vat. "Good practice," Bowery says, clearly suppressing laughter. "Do it again, and I'm telling the magistrate you poisoned the soybeans." She makes the sign for zipped lips and steps back. Take 2. You inhale deeply. Inhale what, exactly? Bark mist? Hibiscus goo vapor? Who knows? You repeat the motion, this time more slowly, more intentionally. Forward, back, side to side, lift, drain. This time it works. You tilt the balu, letting every drop of water trickle through. The pulp settles evenly, the fibers latching onto each other in a delicate web. You pause to let it rest, just long enough for it to bond together, but not so long that it dries on the screen. Once ready, you move over to the gompi, a flat board padded with layers of felt or straw mats used for sheet formation. You flip the frame smoothly and press it down, transferring the sheet in one swift motion. The fiber lies there, fragile, wet, but whole. Repeat. This becomes your rhythm. Dip, swish, lift, drain, flip, press. Each sheet is a meditation. The courtyard fades into background noise, children shouting, oxen lowing in the distance, the rattle of a market cart going by. You could be anywhere, any time. But you're here, in 15th century Korea, at a low wooden vat. making sheets of paper by hand. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The process you're using is part of the Hanji tradition that dates back to the Three Kingdoms period, but by the 15th century, during King Sejong's reign, it had reached peak refinement. Hanji was used for government records, royal decrees, and thanks to the invention of the Hunminjeongeum, the Korean alphabet, increasingly for literature accessible to everyday people. And now you're contributing to that legacy, sheet by soggy sheet. Midway through your stack, you pause to flex your fingers. Your back aches, your arms tremble. Pulp water has soaked through your cuffs, and of course a drop of dak pool is hanging off your nose, because dignity is not included in this profession. Bori holds up one of her sheets like a trophy. "Look," she says, "this one has no holes." You squint. "That's because it's half a sheet." She glances at it, shrugs, and adds it to her drying pile anyway. Around this time, your uncle drops by with 2 roasted sweet potatoes wrapped in leaves. He's not part of the paper-making team, but he knows good timing when he sees it. You split one with Bori, the caramelized skin hot against your calloused fingers. The sweetness hits like a dream. Historians still argue, he says through a mouthful of yam, whether the best paper makers came from Jeolla or Gyeonggi province. You and Bori groan in unison. Every adult in your family has a theory about this. Some say the southern regions made finer, thinner sheets. Others argue the colder north produced more durable ones. It's become a sport. Argue about Hanji origins, then accuse the other side of regional bias. You polish off your yam, wipe your hands on your apron, because of course, and return to the vat. After the last sheet is pressed onto the stack, you rinse the balu clean and hang it to dry on the edge of the shed. The vat is nearly empty now, the once cloudy water settling into a clear pool with stray fibers floating like snowflakes. A final step before the real drying begins. Pressing. You and Bori sandwich your sheets between thick straw mats and carry the stack to the press, a wooden contraption that looks suspiciously like a medieval torture device. You slide the bundle under the lever and take turns adding weight, pressing down slowly. You hear the water drain from the bundle, dripping onto the ground in a steady rhythm. Drip, drip, drip. There's a strange satisfaction in this part. All that effort, scraping, pounding, scooping, is now slowly compacting into something that can last centuries. You wonder who'll write on this paper. A poet? A monk? A cranky scholar complaining about taxes? Or maybe it'll be used to wrap medicine or line shoes. Hanji is nothing if not versatile. And here's a fringe tidbit for your sleepy brain. Some ancient texts describe how Hanji was once used to repair cracked pottery. Dipped in lacquer, the paper became strong enough to seal broken jars and bowls. So yes, your work today could save a teapot tomorrow. Once the pressing is complete, you and Bori carry the damp, flattened stack to the drying frames. These are thin wooden boards left out in the sun, angled just right to catch the breeze but not the dust. The paper is peeled gently from the mats and pressed flat, side by side like sleepy fish laid out to dry. By now the sun is low in the sky. Golden light filters through the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. Your arms feel like boiled radishes. Your hair smells like pulp vat. And your eyes are stinging from too much daylight, reflected off wet paper. But the sheets are there. Thin, strong, beautiful. Bori yawns and stretches. Think they'll notice if I sleep on the drying rack? Only if you wrinkle the paper. You both sit on the edge of the porch, watching the sheets flutter gently in the breeze. Daylight is fading, but tomorrow you'll start again. You wake up the next morning with the kind of muscle soreness that makes you question every decision you've ever made, including the time you decided to race Bori up the hill last week and pretended it didn't almost kill you. Your shoulders groan, your wrists tingle, your thighs feel like they've been steamrolled by an ox cart. But outside, The air smells like sun-warmed bark and morning rice, so you haul yourself upright, mutter something that sounds like a curse but is technically a proverb, and shuffle toward the courtyard. Today is trimming day. Yesterday's freshly dried hanji sheets are now stiff and light, clinging gently to the drying boards like flattened jellyfish. Some have curled corners, others show tiny flecks of bark that didn't break down all the way. Not a problem. This is where you refine, inspect, and, if needed, salvage what the pulp gods have deemed not terrible. You sit cross-legged beside a low table, the stack of dried hanji before you like a pile of snowy pancakes. You pick up the first sheet and hold it to the light. It glows golden in the morning sun, the embedded fibers dancing like tiny rivers. No tears, no holes. You trace your fingers along the edges, crisp but uneven, like someone cut it blindfolded while riding a galloping cow. You reach for your cutting tool. It's called a seolji, a small blade curved just enough to make precision trimming both possible and oddly satisfying. You align a thin wooden ruler along the edge of the paper and slice. The trimmed edge falls away like ribbon, revealing a clean, crisp border. You smile. Bori arrives 5 minutes later, dramatically flopping beside you with a mouthful of barley biscuit. How many sheets ruined so far? None. Liar. Okay, 2, but 1 doesn't count because a chicken stepped on it. She nods as though that's a totally normal hazard. Foul play. You pause, stare, then groan so loudly that a crow caws in protest from the roof. The two of you fall into rhythm, inspecting each sheet with care. You rub out blemishes with a smooth stone, trim frayed edges, and stack the best sheets in one pile, the passable ones in another. The rejects? Bori folds them into paper fans and pretends to be a royal minister. You suspect that pile may be growing faster than necessary. Here's something oddly poetic. Some old records mention that hanji was so well made, entire sheets could survive being folded, unfolded, refolded, and still hold up to calligraphy. That's durability. Rumor has it, some families passed down paper with family mottos written on them, believing the ink carried ancestral wisdom. Others say that's nonsense, but it's a beautiful idea. You look at your pile, clean, sharp-edged, and ready for use. Each sheet took 2 full days to produce. 2 days of sweating, soaking, pounding, scooping, pressing, drying, and trimming. 2 days of your life flattened into a paper-thin slice of permanence. Not bad for tree bark and slime. The next stage? Gluing and sizing. Your mother calls you both into the back room, where bowls of Munball, a natural glue made from flour and water, sometimes mixed with persimmon tannin or fish gelatin. Yum! Sit on the warming stones. The glue has to be just the right consistency, not too thick, not too watery. You stir it with a bamboo spoon, watching as the bubbles rise like sleepy frogs coming up for air. Historians still argue whether fish-based glue was more durable than plant-based glue in early hanji production. Your mother swears by the plant stuff, mostly because she hates the smell of boiling fish parts. Reasonable. You dip a soft brush into the glue and gently swipe it across the back of a hanji sheet. It doesn't soak in. It just sits there like a sheen, ready to add strength and water resistance once it dries. You hang the sheet up carefully, balancing the top edge on a thin string stretched across the drying room. Bori accidentally drops a glued sheet, which lands glue side down on the floor. She lets out a sound like a strangled duck. You glance over. Is it salvageable? She flips it, inspects it. If the king likes sand, call it textured. A few sheets in, your mother shows you how to apply sizing, a process that adds a thin layer of starch or tannin to prevent ink from bleeding. Without it, a brushstroke would spread across the page like spilled tea. With it, the ink settles beautifully, sharp and crisp. You stir the mixture, which smells faintly of fermented fruit and wet stone. Not unpleasant. You brush it gently over the glued sheet, watching as it slightly darkens the surface. Once dry, the paper will have a satin-like finish that's ideal for writing or painting. Bowery, always the opportunist, sneaks in a design, a tiny pine tree drawn in blue on one of her practice sheets. For good luck, she says. Or maybe because she's bored. Either way, your mother doesn't notice. As you work, you hear your grandfather in the adjacent room reciting a gasa, an old Korean poem. His voice is thin but clear, the words rising and falling like waves. The moon rises over Gwanaksan. Even shadows whisper in Hanji light. You pause, brush suspended mid-air. The moment holds, one fringe tidbit for your sleepy brain. In times of famine, people sometimes ate Hanji. Yep, boiled, shredded, and seasoned. It was rough, barky, and probably tasted like depression, but it was technically edible. You wouldn't recommend it as a bedtime snack. By late afternoon, the drying room is full of fluttering sheets, hung like ghostly laundry. You crack the door to let in a breeze, and the entire room rustles with a soft, papery sigh. It's weirdly soothing, like a forest breathing. You sit with Bowery on the porch steps again, her glue-painted pine tree dried into a faint gloss, barely visible unless you tilt the sheet just right. "I think this one's my favorite," she says. "Because you made it?" "Because it's mine." You nod. You get it. The day's almost over. You're exhausted. You're sticky. You've possibly inhaled more bark particles than is medically advisable. But in your hands, real paper. Durable, beautiful, almost sacred. You stand, stretch, and gather the finished sheets, stacking them with care. The sun is slipping behind the trees again, and the sky is brushed in sleepy pinks and golds. Tomorrow you'll prepare a batch for the calligrapher in town, maybe barter a few sheets for dried persimmons. And maybe, just maybe, you'll keep one for yourself. You wake to the sound of scratching. Not mice, not a ghostly spirit writing with claws. It's your grandfather, already up and hunched over his scroll again. He's been testing yesterday's paper, your paper, with his prized inkstone and brush. You slide open the door just enough to peek. He doesn't look up, just says, "This batch is almost worth my poem." That's high praise. You stifle a grin and head out for the next part of your day, delivering a stack of Hanji to town. This isn't just a chore, it's a ritual. You bundle the trimmed and sized sheets into a neat parcel, wrap it in oiled cloth to protect it from moisture, and secure it with twine. It's like packing up slices of your soul and sending them off to be immortalized in someone else's handwriting. Bowery appears with her own bundle. She's added a decorative knot, of course. "Presentation matters," she says, all smug. "Right, because the calligrapher's going to grade us on aesthetics." He might. They say he once rejected a batch because the fibers looked grumpy. Grumpy. That's what I heard. And with that, you're off, down the narrow dirt path from your home toward the town center. The road weaves through pine groves and rice paddies, past that one bridge that still creaks, even though nobody will fix it, and alongside the canal that smells slightly like pickled cabbage. It's market day, so the streets are humming. Vendors hawk everything from ginseng to fish cakes. An old woman is selling roasted chestnuts, and the smell almost derails you. Bowery stops, of course. She barters 2 old paper scraps for a warm cone of chestnuts, then shares them as you walk. Warm, sweet, and smoky. Breakfast of bark-slinging champions. Here's your mainstream historical fact to chew on with those chestnuts. During the Joseon dynasty, official paper deliveries were regulated and even taxed. Government scribes depended on papermakers to provide a steady supply of Hanji for records, edicts, and famously, for printing books using movable wooden type. an invention Korea developed long before Gutenberg. You reach the calligrapher's house, a tidy compound nestled between a silkworm farm and a pottery shed. The door creaks open before you can knock. He's already waiting. Of course. Master Jong is thin as a reed, with ink-stained fingers and eyebrows so bushy they might qualify as pet rodents. He gestures you in silently, then accepts the bundle with the solemnity of a monk receiving scripture. He unties it, lifts a sheet, holds it up to the light. He sniffs it. He actually sniffs it. Bo-ri elbows you. He finally speaks. No warping, even sizing, clean decalies. You wait. Then he nods once and says, "Acceptable." That's basically a standing ovation from Master Jong. He reaches into his robe and pulls out your payment, a pouch of iron coins, clinking softly, and 2 small cakes wrapped in lotus leaf. One is clearly fresher than the other. You let Bo-ri choose. She snags the warm one like a fox in a chicken coop. Historians still argue whether calligraphers preferred paper from personal artisans or from larger government mills, Master Jong mutters while inspecting more sheets. I prefer artisans. There's soul in this paper. You're too stunned to respond. Soul might be the nicest thing he's ever said to anyone, including his wife. On the way back, you stop at the town square and spend a few coins on pickled radish and a pair of new sandals. Yours are practically begging for retirement. As you walk, you pass a public bulletin board, a display of newly printed notices from the local magistrate. You recognize the paper. Your paper. Your stomach flips slightly. There it is, hanging in the breeze, ink soaking into fibers you mixed, pressed, and trimmed just days ago. It's nothing poetic, a notice about a new grain tax and an escaped ox. But still, your work is out there in the world. Bo-ri sees it too. Think that ox will appreciate our craftsmanship? Probably not, but the tax collector might. You sit by the canal for a bit, watching reflections shimmer on the surface. The paper-making process is long, repetitive, and occasionally gross. But moments like this, worth it. You picture someone, maybe a young monk, maybe a nervous student, writing their first letter on your paper. That letter traveling across provinces, tucked in sleeves, folded and unfolded, maybe treasured, or maybe used to swat flies. Either way, it's served. Here's a fringe tidbit that feels relevant. In some temples, hanji was used as a medium for recording prayers, then floated down rivers as offerings. Paper as a message, a vessel, a release. Which means that somewhere out there, prayers written on hanji might still rest at the bottom of a stream, softened by time but still intact. The walk home is quieter. Your arms swing a little looser. Your sandals squeak against the warm earth. Back at the house, you help stack a fresh pile of dak bark for the next cycle. It's a never-ending rhythm, like the tide or your grandfather's poems. But this time, you don't dread it. You scrub your hands, now stained with faint traces of pulp and glue, and finally sit beside your grandfather. He looks over, gives the tiniest nod, then returns to his scroll. On the edge of his desk lies a single sheet. Yours. A poem half written across its surface, the ink crisp, the brush strokes confident. You don't say anything. You just sit, the late afternoon breeze slipping through the papered doors, rustling the edges of his scrolls like whispers. You'd think, after a day like yesterday, with your paper getting the calligrapher's blessing, a real silver payout, and your grandfather writing poetry on your handiwork, you might get to sleep in just a little. Maybe have a dreamy morning where birds chirp and breakfast magically appears next to your pillow. But no. You are, once again, woken up by the distinctive sound of boiling bark water. It's dak cooking day. That's right. Freshly harvested mulberry bark must now be softened in a cauldron of lye water. The smell. Imagine if tree sap went on a weird spa cleanse, and then regretted it. Bowery says it smells like someone cooked their regrets with turnips, and yet it's essential. This is how you separate strong fibers from all that tough outer bark. Just a couple hours of boiling, skimming, and stirring. Easy. Well, easy until you realize your job is to sit beside a pot, hot enough to stew your soul, and stir it with a wooden paddle the size of a canoe oar. You get to it. Every few minutes you skim the foam and gunk that rises to the surface. It's called makuk, and it looks like bark soup gone very, very wrong. Bowery joins you, sleeves rolled high, her face shiny with sweat before she even picks up the ladle. Remind me why we don't make silk fans instead. Because paper doesn't bite. Speak for yourself. I've had splinters in places paper shouldn't reach. The bark boils for 2 hours. During that time, you take turns scraping foam, adding more water, and occasionally poking the floating bark pieces just to see how soft they've become. Eventually, the strands pull apart like noodles. Now you're ready for one of the weirdest and most satisfying parts of hanji making. Pounding. You haul the hot, soggy bark out with tongs, lay it on a flat stone slab, and grab the hungti, a long wooden mallet. You raise it over your head and bring it down in a satisfying whoomp. The fibers splay out like wet spaghetti. You pound and rotate, until the strands begin to lose their structure and turn into a soft pulp. Here's your mainstream historical fact of the day. This step, called balgyeon dak, was traditionally done by hand in small villages. But in state-run paper-making centers, massive stone hammers powered by water wheels would do the job, making enough pulp for government printing needs. So yes, you could say you're operating a very compact, human-powered version of early industrial machinery. Historians still argue whether pounding by hand gave better results than mechanical methods, Bowery says in her most scholarly voice, mimicking one of your grandfather's lecture tones. They debate whether the texture is more soulful when done by sweaty teenagers. You glare at her and keep pounding. After an hour, the pulp looks fluffy. You test it by pinching a wad between your fingers. It's sticky, fibrous, and kind of beautiful in its own barky way. It's ready for the vat. You mix the pulp with water and, here comes the magical ingredient, hibiscus mucilage, or balchion. It's slime time again. You stir it in slowly, watching the fibers suspend evenly in the mixture. Without this slippery goo, the pulp would clump or sink, making sheet formation nearly impossible. A stray thought hits you. Someone, centuries ago, looked at a bucket of hibiscus root goo and thought, yes, let's add this to wet tree bark. Brave, or bored. Once the pulp is balanced, you fetch the bamboo screen and prepare to start pulling sheets again. But this time your rhythm feels more certain. There's a grace to it now. Dip, swirl, shake. The fibers settle onto the screen in soft, glowing layers. You do 1 sheet, then 2, then 20. Bowery joins in, and the two of you wordlessly move in tandem, like some ancient, swamp-scented ballet. One fringe tidbit you remember your grandmother once told you. Some paper makers would whisper to the pulp while pulling sheets. Blessings, tiny prayers, secret wishes. Some thought it helped the fibers bind better. Others thought it kept away mold. Either way, you try it now, muttering a tiny wish under your breath. It's dumb. It's also kind of nice. Your mother calls for a break. She's laid out lunch, cold noodles, kimchi, and chilled barley tea. You sit under the mulberry tree, shirts soaked with sweat, arms sore from the pounding and scooping. But the noodles taste like a reward. The tea? Heaven. You glance over at Bowery. Her eyelids are half closed, tea bowl resting on her stomach like she might never move again. Then she says, eyes still shut, "What if we made colored hanji?" You blink. Like blue. or gold, or green with speckles. People would go crazy for that. It's not clothes. No, but it could be. And now she's talking about Hanji lanterns, Hanji masks, Hanji armor. Okay, not armor. That's probably a bit much. But you can't deny the paper's versatility. Hanji wasn't just for writing. It was used in doors, walls, ceremonial wrappings, even sometimes folded into protective charms. Some temples pressed crushed medicinal herbs into hanji and burned the sheets for healing prayers. Which brings up a not-so-comforting memory. A neighbor once tried to waterproof his shoes with hanji soaked in ox blood. They didn't leak. They also smelled like a cursed festival for 3 months. After lunch, you return to the vat. The rhythm of sheet pulling, pressing, drying. It's all familiar now. Your hands move without hesitation. Your eyes catch tiny imperfections before they become problems. You've grown into the craft, even if your shoulders still complain at night. By sunset, your second stack of sheets for the week is drying in the paper room, edges curling slightly in the heat. Your mother gives a nod of approval. Your grandfather peeks in and mumbles, "They'll last 100 years, those." Bori bows dramatically. "Only 100? You smile, closing the doors gently against the rising night air. Somewhere out there, someone will write a love letter, a poem, maybe even a secret confession on one of these pages. And no one, not even the royal record keepers or tax lords, can strip the soul from paper made by your own hands. Today doesn't start with the usual clatter of tools or bubbling of bark water. No, this morning starts with birds. Loud, inconsiderate birds who've apparently decided your rooftop is the place to host the 15th century Korean version of an open mic night. Bori throws a pebble at them. They ignore it, naturally. Still, you're up, and today's a special day. You get to visit the palace storehouse. Okay, not the actual palace, but a royal storage compound, part archive, part warehouse, and part mystery box. Your family has been asked to deliver a batch of hanji sheets for official use, and you've been picked to accompany your grandfather. This is big, really big. Paper destined for government records, potentially even for the court scholars, and possibly for the dreaded Ministry of Rights, people who spend their lives thinking about calendar math and etiquette so complicated even your grandfather mutters about it under his breath. You set out early with the cart, the morning air cool and sweet. Your grandfather sits beside you, adjusting his robes like he's going to tea with the king. Which, to be fair, this delivery is kind of like that, for a paper maker. The road winds past more farmland, the kind with scarecrows wearing old straw hats and the occasional pig trying to break through a fence. You pass a group of young boys catching grasshoppers with bamboo traps and a vendor balancing live eels in a basket. The town begins to wake up behind you, leaving the quieter edge of bureaucracy ahead. The royal storehouse is built like a fortress, tall wooden gates, whitewashed walls, and guards who look like they haven't smiled since the previous dynasty. One of them eyes your cart. "Hanji?" Your grandfather nods. The guard gestures for a quick inspection. You watch as he lifts a sheet delicately, pinches the edge like he's testing fruit, then grunts. "This way." You're led inside to a surprisingly serene courtyard. A small pond sits to one side with lotuses bobbing quietly. Along the walls, sealed clay jars and bundles of goods wait under thick fabric covers. And in the center, tall scroll racks, wooden shelving, and drawers big enough to hold full ledgers of records. Here's your mainstream historical fact. During the Joseon dynasty, Korea maintained one of the most detailed and centralized record-keeping systems in the world. From land ownership to astrological data to rice tax ledgers, everything was documented. On hanji. That means someone somewhere likely still has records written on paper your ancestors made. Historians still argue whether certain classified documents were stored on special hanji infused with natural repellents like chili powder or herbs, your grandfather says, gesturing to a sealed cabinet. Some say the paper itself was meant to survive fire. Others say that's just an old monk's tale. You're not entirely sure you believe that either, but it sounds cool enough that you want it to be true. You deliver your bundle to the archive scribe, a stiff man with spectacles so thick you can see your future in them. He records the delivery on a scroll, then, curiously, marks your family name. Repeat order likely next month, he says without looking up. That's it. No bow. No, thank you for supplying the backbone of our civilization. Just a pencil scratch and a dismissive nod. You roll the cart out feeling oddly proud and slightly invisible at the same time. On the walk back, your grandfather is quiet for a while, then says, "It's strange, isn't it? The paper we make. Most people will never know who made it, but they'll trust what's written on it. Royal decrees, wedding contracts, land rights, as if the truth is stronger when written on something that lasts." You nod, not really sure how to answer. The idea that your work holds history, that it may last longer than the names of the people writing on it, is both thrilling and a little heavy. Also, he adds, if anyone ever questions the thickness of my paper again, I might just throw them in the mulberry vat. And just like that, the moment breaks. You both laugh and the sun feels warmer. On the way home, you pass a small alley near the temple and hear the rhythmic thunk of carving. Curious, you peek in and find an old man working on wood blocks, each one etched with tiny, perfect characters. He's a woodblock carver, prepping for a printing project. Printing Buddhist texts, he explains without looking up. Tiny ones, for funeral offerings. The blocks are small enough to fit in your hand, and the lines of text are almost invisible from more than a few inches away. He looks up and adds, "But I can't print without good hanji. You wouldn't happen to—" Your grandfather cuts in with a little smile. "We'll bring some next week." The carver nods, satisfied. "Here's your fringe tidbit. In some funerary traditions, especially among more rural communities, miniature Buddhist scriptures were printed on tiny sheets of hanji, folded and inserted into wooden or clay figurines. These weren't meant to be read. They were symbolic, a spiritual compact with the afterlife, printed faith in pocket size. Back home, Bori's waiting with something she's clearly proud of. A hand-formed hanji lantern. It's rough, slightly lopsided, and smells faintly of rice glue. But when she lights a small candle inside, the whole thing glows soft gold, like fire inside a peach. "I used scrap sheets," she says, "stuff we'd normally toss." You look at it, glowing quietly in the darkened hallway, and suddenly you understand why someone might want to wrap prayers in paper. It's not just bark and glue, it's light and memory. You hang the lantern by the door where it casts soft shadows across the floor. Another day ends. Tomorrow, more bark, more boiling, more beating and pulling and drying. But tonight, there's light. Your grandfather sits by the doorway, sipping tea. The moon reflects faintly in the lacquer of his cup, and you sit beside him, your legs tired and your hands ink-stained, but your heart warm and flickering, like Bori's little lantern. You wake up before the birds today, not out of discipline, but because your back is in open rebellion from all the sheet pressing yesterday. There's a distinct crick near your left shoulder that makes you walk like an old court eunuch who's lost his sense of direction. Still, you're up, you're vertical, and you've got pulp to stir. So here we go. Today's task is the final drying of yesterday's hanji batch, and that means breaking out the big panels. The drying room smells warm and woody. It's built to catch morning light and trap it in a way that dries paper without baking it. Think sunroom meets sauna, minus the spa music and citrus water. Beaury's already there, arranging sheets on drying boards. She's balancing each one with the gentle touch of someone laying out newborn silkworms. "Welcome to the Museum of Slightly Damp Paper," she says, barely looking up. You help her smooth the sheets over wide wooden panels, rubbing them gently with a soft pad to ensure they dry flat and stick well. This process, jianji, takes patience. You can't just slap the paper on and call it a day. No, the sheet has to be aligned with the grain, pressed edge to edge, and given the right amount of contact or it'll curl like dried fish. And guess what? If one curls, they all start curling. It's like a petty protest movement. Mainstream historical fact incoming. Joseon-era papermakers often reuse their drying boards for years, sometimes decades. The smoothness of these panels, burnished from generations of use, actually helped create more uniform paper. There's an entire philosophy buried in that, about how worn surfaces make smoother results. You try not to get too poetic about it. As you work, Beaury starts humming an old folk song about turtles and kings. It's off-key, but charming. "Hey," she says mid-verse, "what do you think happens to the paper we mess up?" You blink. "You mean, like, scraps?" "Yeah, the weird ones, the wrinkly ones, the accident children of the vat." "Well," you start, "some get used for wrapping herbs or writing draft scrolls. Maybe kindling?" She nods. "I heard some monks use them to test brush strokes before writing prayers. Like warm-ups. Here's your fringe tidbit of the day. Certain traveling shamans reportedly used scrap hanji to make bokjumyoni, blessing pouches filled with bits of herbs, coins, or hair. They'd burn these during rituals to chase away bad dreams or illness. So even the ugly paper had a chance to become sacred. Kind of makes you want to hug your reject bin, doesn't it? You finish laying the last few sheets and head outside to the back courtyard, where your mother is tending to a small fire pit. She's cooking rice glue, used for binding specialty hanji into boxes and envelopes. She gives you a spoon to stir, and it smells like old porridge. Not unpleasant, not delicious, just ancestral. While the glue simmers, your grandfather emerges with a surprise. He's brought out one of the oldest surviving sheets in the household, a piece of hanji so fine it's nearly translucent. It's sandwiched between layers of silk and stored in a lacquered case. He unwraps it, slowly, reverently. "This," he says, "was made by my grandfather." For a Confucian scholar in Hanyang, the paper gleams slightly, even in shade. Its surface is so smooth, you could mistake it for skin. The fiber lines are barely visible. "Still soft," he mutters, holding it up to the light. Even after 70 years. You look at the sheet and suddenly feel a weight, not just of craft, but of time. All the hands it's passed through, the words it's carried, maybe even tears. It's a humble thing, this square of bark and water, but it has seen things, more than most people. Historians still argue whether some of these early sheets were preserved using special oils or simply lasted because of the climate. Your grandfather says softly, "I say, good fiber, good hands, and good heart." It's a corny thing to say, but you don't roll your eyes. Back in the drying room, Beaury has started testing pigment on a few of the more experimental sheets. She's made a mash of indigo leaves and rice paste, applying it in stripes with a brush she carved herself from bamboo and goat hair. It's a disaster, obviously, but a beautiful one. The colors sink and bleed in unpredictable ways, creating dreamy patterns. She shrugs. Maybe it'll be fashion one day. You can almost see it. People wearing robes with swirling hanji panels, masks folded from scented paper, ceremonial hats made entirely of colored pulp. Okay, maybe not the hats. No one wants a soggy hat. By afternoon, the sheets have mostly dried. You start peeling them carefully off the boards. This part always feels like unwrapping gifts, each one a little different. Some are smooth, flawless. Others have faint wrinkles or bubbles. You stack them according to grade. Top tier for calligraphy and documents, second tier for packaging, and so on. While sorting, you find one that's odd. There's a swirl in the middle like someone stirred it mid-drying. You hold it up to the light. It looks like a spiral galaxy made of bark. You decide to keep that one. Later, your family gathers under the mulberry tree for a shared evening meal. Rice, salted fish, greens with sesame oil. It's simple, but perfect. You watch the lantern Boris made last week swaying gently in the wind. Your grandfather tells a story about when a tiger once wandered into a papermaker's hut during a festival. The man froze, he says, but the tiger sniffed the bark vat, sneezed, and walked out. You're not sure if this story is true, but you want it to be. Dinner ends. Boris starts sketching little designs with a piece of charcoal on a spare sheet. You doodle a small tiger in the corner. Your grandfather adds a crude mountain. It's silly. It's quiet. It's perfect. That night, before bed, you slip your spiral galaxy sheet into a wrap cloth and hide it in your chest. Not to sell, not to give away, just to keep. A paper that didn't quite follow the rules, but still made it to the drying rack. Morning comes with a thick mist hanging low over the fields, the kind that makes every sound feel muffled, like the world is wrapped in cotton. You step outside, and the air is cool enough to tighten your skin, damp enough to slick your eyelashes. The mulberry leaves glisten with beads of dew, and for a moment, the workshop looks like something out of a ghost tale. Boris whispers, "Perfect day for fermentation." She's right. The humidity and mild warmth mean it's time to mix another batch of dakpul, that rooty slime extracted from hibiscus bark, essential for suspending fibers in the pulp tank. If paper is a canvas, dakpul is what stops your brush from sliding off it. It's slippery, stringy, and smells like a frog's tea party. But without it, your pulp would just clump at the bottom like forgotten porridge. Your grandfather hands you a bundle of dry ibeca roots. Soak these first. Beat 'em when they're soft. You dunk the roots in warm water and wait. It takes patience, something this profession doesn't just require, but drills into you day by day. Eventually, the roots soften, and you kneel by the stone slab to pound them into submission. They turn into a fibrous goop that you'll mix into the pulp tank like some kind of medieval jelly chef. Mainstream historical moment here. In Korean papermaking, dakpul is often sourced from hibiscus manihot, and it's crucial for separating and suspending fibers evenly in the vat. Unlike modern binders or surfactants, dakpul is natural, non-toxic, and lets the sheets dry to a strong, crisp finish. Back at the vat, Boris already got the mulberry pulp ready. Today you're doing a specialty batch, ultra-thin hanji for printing religious texts. These sheets have to be lighter than a dragonfly's wing, strong enough not to tear under a woodblock, and smooth enough to avoid ink blotting. Basically, they're the Goldilocks of paper. As you stir in the dakpul, the texture of the mixture changes immediately. Fibers float like ghosts in suspension, no longer clinging together or sinking. You grab your bamboo mold and start the rhythm. Dip, shake, drain. Each motion has a beat, like a paper ballet. You've done this 100 times, but today it feels different. Boris leans over. If we mess up the thickness even slightly, the ink will run. Or worse, the woodblock will punch through the sheet. No pressure, you mutter, keeping your hands steady. One dip, one sheet, then another. The process flows. Your fingers work faster than your thoughts, like your muscles have memorized movements your mind hasn't caught up to. Here's your fringe tidbit of the day. Some say the best hanji makers could hear the pulp. A tiny shift in how the water hissed off the mold or how the fibers moved against the bamboo screen could tell them if the batch was ready or not. It's probably romanticized, but as you listen now, you think you hear it too. A whisper in the splash, like a wet secret. Lunch is quick, barley rice and radish soup, and then it's back to the vat. As the day goes on, your pile of ultra-thin sheets grows. You dry them indoors this time, hanging them like silk from a long oiled pole. They sway as they dry, and Bowery compares them to ghosts of scholars past. Historians still argue whether the earliest Buddhist sutras printed in Korea used imported Chinese paper or native hanji, she says. But by the 15th century, our paper was better. Even the monks said so. You nod, carefully pinning another sheet. Outside, thunder rumbles in the hills. A summer storm is crawling toward you. You can smell the rain before you see it. Wet stone, cracked leaves, and something electric. Everyone in the house jumps into motion. Even Bowery's usually chill attitude evaporates. Drying boards are brought in, windows are shuttered, and the pulp tank is covered. Rain is great for crops, terrible for paper. You manage to save all the thin hanji just in time. One last gust of wind snatches a corner, but you pin it down with your knee, heart racing. A second later, and that sheet would have been plastered to the side of the chicken coop. The storm hits like a drum beat, thunder, then rain. Heavy, determined, almost arrogant in its rhythm. You sit with Bowery under the eaves, watching water stream from the roof tiles like silver ropes. The chickens huddle under an overturned basket, looking profoundly unimpressed. Your grandfather joins you, sipping warm rice wine. They say storms are good luck for finishing a batch, he says. It's the sky washing away bad spirits. You smirk. Or it's just the sky ruining our hard work. He shrugs. Same thing, maybe. Later that evening, after the storm passes and the world glistens like lacquer, you inspect the hanji from the day. Each sheet is a miracle, thin as breath, strong as spider silk, smooth like the inside of a conch shell. You almost can't believe you made them. Bowery touches one gently. These are going to the temple in town for printing prayers. You imagine a monk, decades from now, pressing a woodblock onto one of these sheets, and maybe a pilgrim, years after that, holding a page in trembling hands, thinking it's sacred. All that from bark and slime and stormlight. Back in your room, you tuck one of the finished sheets into your chest, next to the spiral one. You're starting a little archive, it seems, and though you're not a monk or a scribe or a scholar, you realize something else. You're a vessel too, for skill, for memory, for a craft that speaks softly across generations. You drift to sleep with thunder still echoing far away, like a drum calling to the gods, or maybe just calling you back to the vat again and again. The day begins with a mess. You wake to the sound of someone shouting in the yard, your grandfather, swearing in a way that's still technically PG-13. You rush outside to find a disaster in progress. One of the vats has tipped, spilling water and partially processed pulp all over the hard-packed ground. The wooden frame has cracked clean through, and there's a mournful pile of half-soaked mulberry fibers in a puddle of mud. Great, Bowery mutters, squinting at the wreck. It's the Monday of vats. Damage control starts fast. The family jumps into action like a well-oiled paper emergency squad. You're sent to the creek with Bowery to refill buckets, while your grandfather tries to salvage what he can from the splintered vat frame. Water sloshes over your shoes as you march back and forth, 10 buckets deep before the new vat begins to fill. And here's your mainstream historical fact of the day. During the Joseon dynasty, paper-making equipment was usually handmade and maintained by the artisans themselves. Vats were often crafted from ginkgo or pine, selected for durability and water resistance. When one broke, there was no hardware store to call, Just skill, elbow grease, and a lot of muttering. By late morning, the new vat is patched together with iron clamps and soaked rope. It's not pretty, but it holds. You dump the remaining pulp into it, stir with a long paddle, and glance at Bowery. "Back to work?" she groans. "I haven't even had breakfast yet." To make the day weirder, your uncle arrives unexpectedly. He's a trader who spends most of the year moving between markets with carts full of paper, dried herbs, and the occasional bootleg mirror. Today he's brought news and samples. He opens a bundle to show off a strange, oily-looking hanji from the southern provinces. "They're treating it with boiled sesame oil now," he says, letting you feel the smooth surface. "Water-resistant. For umbrellas." You blink. "People make umbrellas out of paper?" He grins. "If you're rich enough not to mind when it leaks." Fringe tidbit alert. Yes, some high-end hanji was oiled with sesame or perilla to make it water-resistant. It was then used for items like umbrellas, rain cloaks, and even paper shoes. Wealthy nobles loved showing off in them, until the rain got serious. Bowery pokes the paper skeptically. "We should try it." Your grandfather scowls. "We should perfect the old way first." The tension hangs in the air like smoke. Your uncle shrugs and moves on to chatting about politics and how the king's scribes are commissioning more record paper than ever before. Historians still argue whether that spike was for bureaucratic expansion or just increased surveillance, he says casually, munching on dried persimmon. "Either way, it's more work for us." More work indeed. You spend the afternoon helping Bowery test an idea, pressing thinner paper with flat, heated stones to mimic the oiled sheen. The result? Warped, slightly crispy sheets that smell vaguely of breakfast. Back to the drawing board. To break up the day, your mother suggests a walk to the village shrine. You and Bowery follow the forest path, carrying a small offering of rice cakes wrapped in old hanji. The paper's soft, aged, yellowed around the edges. She tucks it into a stone crevice beside the shrine's incense dish. "They say if you burn a prayer written on paper here," she whispers, "it travels faster." The shrine is tiny, a stone fox, moss-covered and squinting like it disapproves of your shoes. You light incense anyway and sit on the stone steps. "I used to think the fox would eat the bad dreams if you paid it," Bowery says. "So I left it candy. Didn't work. Still dreamed about frogs." You chuckle, then pull out a scrap of paper and write a quick wish. No more broken vats. Or frogs. As smoke curls around the shrine, the late afternoon light shifts golden. Bowery sketches the fox in her notebook with a bit of charcoal, adding exaggerated fangs and tiny wings. "Now it's a dream-fighting super fox," she says, triumphant. Back at the workshop, your grandfather's in a better mood. He's working on a commissioned batch of thick, textured hanji, used for mounting calligraphy or making ceremonial fans. These sheets require multiple layers of pulp, pressed and bonded over time. He lets you assist. Layer by layer, you build each sheet with care. The pulp is thicker, more like porridge now. You learn to pause between dips, to let each layer settle before adding the next. It's slow, meditative, a bit like making a paper lasagna. You ask him, "Why go to all this trouble for one sheet?" He thinks about it. Because someone, somewhere is going to hold it and feel something. Not every answer has to be long. Evening brings another surprise. Bowery's lantern, the one made from dyed hanji, is finally dry and ready. She lights a candle and sets it inside. The paper glows like stained glass, casting soft, kaleidoscopic light onto the walls. You all gather around. Even your usually unimpressed grandfather hums in appreciation. It's beautiful, fragile, and a little uneven, but it sings in its own quiet way. As the lantern flickers, your uncle begins telling a story about a haunted scroll. Supposedly, a wandering monk once wrote a prayer so powerful on Hanji that the ink burned into the fibers. The scroll glowed at night and whispered warnings to anyone who held it. Bori scoffs. That's ridiculous. You lean in. What happened to it? Sold to a rich noble. Burned down his house. You glance at the lantern, just in case. When you finally lie down to sleep, the glow from the paper lantern still spills gently across the floorboards. You think about wishes made of bark, ghosts in paper, and the million invisible hands guiding yours. The vat broke. The day went sideways. But somehow, it's still been a good one. The rooster forgets to crow today. Or maybe you're just awake too early, eyes blinking in the pre-dawn dark, limbs stiff from yesterday's vat-lifting adventure. The paper lantern is still glowing faintly from its final flicker, now leaning slightly sideways like it's exhausted too. You stretch, tiptoe across the cool floorboards, and head outside, because today is market day. You, Bori, and your uncle are hauling a fresh stack of dried hanji to the nearby town's open-air bazaar. It's a 2-hour walk along a gravel path, winding through rice paddies and pine groves still cloaked in fog. The morning air smells of damp earth and charcoal smoke, with that faint sweet scent of ripening peaches drifting from someone's orchard. You carry the bundle carefully in a cloth sling across your back, the weight of 100 sheets pressing warm against your spine. It's not heavy. Hanji never is. But it feels like you're transporting the souls of all your past selves from the last month. Bori hums a nonsense song as she walks. Your uncle chews on a twig like he's in a samurai movie. No one says much. Mornings like this are best kept quiet. By the time you reach the town gates, the sun's high enough to cast long shadows through the thatched rooftops. The market is already buzzing. Smells of grilled mackerel and fermented soybean paste fight for dominance. Women in straw hats shout over prices, and children dart between stalls with sticky rice sweets clutched in their fists. Your family's spot is tucked between a comb seller and a spice merchant who always insists his pepper cures heartbreak. You lay out the hanji sheets on low wooden racks, weighting the corners with smooth river stones so they don't flutter away. And here's your historical anchor. During the Joseon dynasty, hanji was a high-demand commodity, especially in provincial markets like this one. Merchants, monks, scholars, even giseng performers would visit stalls to purchase different grades of paper, for everything from record-keeping to poetry to wrapping dried fish. Soon, customers trickle in. A school teacher from the nearby village examines the grain of your thinnest sheets, holding one up to the light. Like moonlight trapped in bark, he says dreamily. He buys 20. A giseng buys several dyed sheets for fan-making. A monk barters for thick scroll stock, asking detailed questions about how many times it was pressed and if the dakpul was made fresh. Bori naturally charms everyone. She has a way of explaining hanji like she's offering a dessert. Crisp but soft, durable yet delicate. Excellent for writing your love poems or your tax records. As the crowd grows, your uncle keeps busy negotiating with bulk buyers. One trader wants to take a whole bundle for shipment down to the southern ports. He flips a few sheets and narrows his eyes. Too thin, he says. Too cheap, your uncle replies. They haggle like two roosters in a rice bowl, finally settling on a price that makes neither of them happy, which means it's probably fair. Then comes the weirdest customer of the day, a man in richly embroidered robes with the most perfect eyebrows you've ever seen. He introduces himself as a calligrapher from the capital. I require 10 sheets, he says. Uncreased, medium thin, flexible, but with confident tooth. Bori raises an eyebrow. Confident tooth. Something the brush can flirt with, he adds. Fringe fact time. High-level calligraphers were notoriously picky about their hanji. Some even commissioned paper custom-suited to their brush pressure, stroke speed, and ink consistency. There's one debated record of a royal calligrapher who rejected 99 sheets before accepting a single one. Historians still argue whether this was artistry or just ego. You carefully wrap 10 perfect sheets for this man and hand them over like rare jewels. He bows deeply, promises your name will be remembered, and sweeps off dramatically. You're not convinced he wasn't an actor rehearsing for a play. As the sun climbs higher, the market begins to slow. You snack on roasted chestnuts and barter for sesame candy with scraps of scrap paper. Bowery swaps a dyed sheet for a silk ribbon. Your uncle scores a huge bundle of dried chili peppers for next to nothing. Always good to have something that keeps tigers and in-laws away. But then, in the slow warmth of afternoon, something else catches your eye. A bookstall at the far end of the market. Old texts, new scrolls, inkstones, and brushes. Among the piles sits a dusty, worn booklet tied with faded green twine. You pick it up. Inside, woodblock prints, poems, a sketch of a hawk. And on the last page, a single line written in brushwork, so clean it feels alive. Everything you touch leaves a mark, especially what you don't see. You buy it. Of course you do. The walk home is heavier now, the sun at your back and your feet tired from standing. But your heart is lighter. The day has brought stories, sales, and that strange kind of joy that comes from sharing something you made with your own hands and seeing someone else see it. Back at the workshop, your grandfather examines the day's earnings. Not bad, he grunts. Could have charged more for the dyed sheets. Bowery waves a hand. We got a poem, a ribbon, and confidence tooth praise. Priceless. You hide the booklet under your sleeping mat like a secret. Later, when everyone's asleep and the lantern's back on its hook, you pull it out again and reread that last line. Everything you touch leaves a mark. Maybe that's what Hanji is, really. A long, soft mark left behind. Not shouted, not flashy. Just enduring. You close your eyes to the sound of frogs and soft paper rustling in the breeze. The day was full. Tomorrow it begins again. The air smells different today. You wake up to a breeze coming through the paper-covered windows, cooler, crisper, like something's shifting. Autumn's first real breath has arrived, brushing aside the sticky fingers of summer. The scent of drying pine needles and distant smoke curls into your nose as you stretch and sit up, listening to the sounds of morning. Someone sharpening a blade, a gourd ladle clinking against stone, Bowery humming in her sleep with her mouth half open. You grin and leave her to her musical dreams. Today the Hanji won't make itself. Breakfast is barley porridge again, hot, bland, oddly comforting. Your grandfather stirs his with slow, measured swirls while talking about today's goal, finishing a run of ceremonial paper for a local official's son's coming-of-age celebration. It needs to be bright white, light enough to fold, but sturdy enough to be embossed later. You rinse your hands in a wooden basin and head out to the drying yard. Yesterday's pulp, prepped and settled, is ready. The process feels familiar now, like muscle memory. You dip the screen, tilt, swirl, lift, drain. Sheet after sheet takes shape. And here's your mainstream historical fact. White ceremonial Hanji was often bleached, using a technique involving fermented rice water and exposure to sunlight. It didn't just lighten the color, it helped smooth the fibers and added an almost silky finish. You're not at that step yet, but you can already imagine how the paper will glow under the autumn sun. Mid-morning brings a challenge. A chunk of pulp from yesterday's batch turns out gritty. Somehow, a few sand particles made their way in. Bowery suspects the mesh strainer was left too close to the ground. You pause production to filter the batch, and she sighs dramatically. We're going to die buried under paper, aren't we? You glance at the stack. At least it'll be a soft coffin. By noon, the cleaned pulp is flowing better, and you're deep into the rhythm again. Pour, lift, shake, settle. The movement becomes its own kind of trance. You think about the time before you knew how to do this, how the tools felt too big, the screens too heavy, the pulp too mysterious. Now, the whole process fits inside you like a second language. That's when your grandfather calls you over to watch him demonstrate embossing. He set up a wooden stamp carved with a pattern of swirling clouds and cranes, symbolizing longevity and grace. He shows you how to wet the finished sheet slightly, press the stamp gently but firmly, and lift it off. The design appears like magic, faint but elegant, catching light just enough to whisper its presence. You only emboss the ones that matter, he says. Too many marks, and the page forgets what it's supposed to be. You nod, not quite sure what he means, but letting the words stick anyway. As you work beside him, he tells a story. Something about a government inspector who once tested a papermaker by soaking sheets in vinegar and folding them in winter wind to see if they held up. They say he could tell the region by the smell alone. You raise an eyebrow. That sounds fake. Historians still argue whether the vinegar test was real or just a prank played on apprentices, he replies, straight-faced. Afternoon light filters through the drying yard as Bowery begins folding finished sheets into ceremonial shapes. Lotus blossoms, spirals, birds. Each one will be burned during the coming-of-age ceremony, meant to carry wishes and thanks skyward in smoke. Fringe tidbit time, paper folding in Korea, known as japji, was used for more than art. It carried meaning. In rituals, it often represented impermanence, transformation, or the desire to communicate with ancestors. These weren't just decorations. They were messages. You try folding a bird. It looks more like a crumpled onion. Bowery helpfully names it the majestic sky lump. You pretend to be deeply insulted, then spend the next 10 minutes trying to improve your bird game. As the sun lowers and shadows lengthen, a neighbor arrives, an old woman with a walking stick and a glint in her eye. She's come to commission paper for winter window repair. My old ones have too many ghost holes, she says, tapping her cane. You and Bowery deliver a fresh bundle to her home. Along the way, she tells you her late husband was a storyteller who once wrote a fable on Hanji so beautiful that birds came to listen. Did they? You ask. She smiles. Only the ones who couldn't read. The walk back is slow, thoughtful. The sky's turning that rich orange pink that makes even scarecrows look poetic. You pass a tree whose leaves are already changing, like little flames clinging to crooked branches. Back at the workshop, your grandfather is boiling rice water for the bleaching process. The smell is strange, but not unpleasant, like wet starch and fermented dreams. He soaks the white sheets and sets them under angled mirrors to catch the last rays of sun. The moon will help too, he says. It always does. Later, Bowery coaxes you onto the roof. You both sit there, knees tucked up, watching the stars blink into view. The mountain air has that first bite of winter in it. She pulls out her sketchbook and starts drawing again. Do you think people 100 years from now will still care about Hanji? She asks. You think for a second. I think they'll care about what it carried. She nods slowly, like that makes sense. Below, the soft rustle of drying paper and the gurgle of the rice vat hum in the silence. Even the wind seems gentler now, as if it respects the paper's journey. You fall asleep thinking of birds, paper moons, and vinegar inspectors. The world is hushed this morning, like it knows today marks something. You wake not to the clang of a pot or the call of your grandfather, but to stillness. Even the birds are whispering. For once, Bowery is already up, sitting cross-legged on the porch, sipping barley tea with a rare look of calm. The sky is pale, sun barely risen, casting soft golden light across the courtyard and over the racks of paper sheets that shimmer like silk banners waiting to take flight. Today's not a working day, not really. The paper is finished. That doesn't mean you get to laze around like a napping tiger. There's still cleaning, storing, labeling, and a few final quality checks, but it's a slow pace, like winding down after a long hike. You stack the best sheets in tight bundles, wrapping them in oiled cloth to protect from moisture, and tuck them onto the shelves in the storehouse. Your grandfather inspects each one, humming in his throat. Clean, he mutters at one. Too proud at another, meaning the grain stands up too much. Like a cat that thinks it's a tiger. You roll your eyes and move on. He picks out 3 sheets and lays them carefully aside. For offering, he says. That means they'll go to the temple, burned as a sign of thanks and renewal. It's a common practice, one you never really questioned before, but now it feels different. You made those sheets. Burned offerings aren't waste, they're gratitude rising in smoke. Here's your final mainstream fact. In Joseon, Korea, paper was so valuable that it featured in both state rituals and folk customs. It was used in weddings, funerals, spiritual offerings, and even as official tribute to the Ming dynasty. A single sheet could mean honor, debt, or prayer, depending on how it was folded or written. Mid-morning, the monk from the nearby temple arrives on his creaky ox cart to collect the offering papers. He greets your grandfather with a low bow and hands you both tiny pouches of dried persimmon. Sweet reminders of patience, he says cryptically, before disappearing down the path again like some kind of fruity wizard. Bori eats hers in one bite. I think he means we should stop working ourselves into scarecrows, she says, licking her fingers. You laugh and finally sit down, not just to pause, but to notice. The tools are resting, the vats are drying, the pulp stains on your forearms are fading. There's a quiet sense of finishing in the air. Not an end, exactly, but a lull between the waves. It's during this lull that you and Bori do something odd. You make a sheet of paper just for yourselves. No order, no client, no ritual. Just one big sheet, thicker than usual, layered like a tree ring. Into the pulp you both press in odd little things, a thread from Bori's ribbon, a petal from the persimmon blossom tree, a small carved symbol with your initials. You lay it to dry, knowing no one will use it. It's not meant to be written on. It's a memory. That fringe fact I promised. Some Hanji artisans did this, especially during the changing of seasons or after finishing a major commission. Hidden among stacks and storerooms were these anonymous, personal sheets, thicker, sometimes dyed or patterned, meant to capture a moment. Historians still argue whether these were secret messages, artistic indulgences, or quiet acts of self-expression. Maybe all 3. Later, your uncle surprises you all with something he's been hiding. A stack of old Hanji from his own apprenticeship, yellowed with age but still sturdy. He laughs as he flips through them, some full of smudged brushwork, others clearly failed experiments. You think what you made is the first majestic sky lump. Look at this monstrosity. He holds up a wrinkled sheet with a weirdly misshapen fish inked on it. Bori gasps. It's beautiful. I would hang that in a palace. Only if the palace was underwater, he deadpans. That evening, you all gather in the courtyard with a small brazier for the offering. The 3 perfect sheets are fed into the fire one at a time. The flames curl their edges, then lift them into wisps. You swear they glow gold before vanishing. And just like that, the paper returns to the sky. Bori holds your memory sheet in her lap and says, "Let's not burn this one." You nod. "Let's hide it somewhere ridiculous, like behind the rice jars." "No," she says, "let's hide it in plain sight." So you hang it on the inside of the storeroom door, just above eye level. It blends in at first glance, but if someone really looks, they'll see the threads, the petal, the initials. They'll see you. That night you lie in bed listening to the soft creak of beams, the distant bark of a night dog, and the rhythmic chirp of late summer crickets. The air is cool now, sweater cool, blanket cool. One season is quietly handing the reins to the next. You've learned to speak paper, not perfectly, not forever, but enough. And tomorrow maybe you'll teach someone else. And now, as the hanji rests and the tools are cleaned, you too can let go of the weight of the day. Picture that last sheet, thick, warm, secretly marked, hanging quietly inside the storeroom door. Imagine it catching the light from a sunbeam just before dusk, the fibers glowing like a fingerprint of time. It doesn't need to be read or folded or inked. It simply is. Let your breath soften like mulberry pulp swirling in water. Let your thoughts settle, the way paper fibers gently find their place in the vat, sinking into stillness without force. The quiet is not empty. It is full of memory, care, and unseen hands that shape something lasting. You can almost hear the soft flap of paper lanterns swaying in the night wind. You can feel the tatami mat under your shoulder blades, the scent of ink lingering in your sleeves, and the subtle pride of having made something real. Something that will outlast you, even if no one knows your name. Your day may not have involved vats or drying racks, but maybe you too have left behind a mark today. Quiet, invisible, but real. So rest now. Let the moon hang low and silver above your window. Let your breath rise and fall, smooth as a fresh sheet of hanji. Let the story end softly like a page turning itself in the dark. Sweet dreams.